Okay, right here. It's short.
I had a lot of friends who were deeply disappointed by the demonstrations, who expressed concern that a lot of the serious issues were not addressed, that protesters avoided the criminality of the Trump administration, and especially the manner in which the Democratic Party supported the Trump administration, refused to call them on the most serious issues. And I was sympathetic to that criticism, but at the same time, I felt that getting the ball rolling, actually having people in the street talking, working, making their own signs, and sort of overwhelming those people within Indivisible who wanted a limited agenda is a necessary first step. So my final feeling, although I think it might have been best not to dress up in frog suits, but it probably was a good first step.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca, with teaching socialist Andy Lipson and Michael Hoffman, socialist and community college maths professor. And I said maths professor. Oh, and there's that mask. Oh man, let's get this show going. And Michael Hoffman, socialist and community college maths professor. And socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at whatsleft.podcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate the future, and on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well. If you would like us, should contact us to our site at whatsleftpodcast.com. Thank you. All right, Andy, start us off.
Well, first, Michael, why were you showing us that mask?
Oh, well, Eduardo was coughing, and we expressed that we didn't feel safe, and he denied that there was an option available, and I just had to show, there is a digital mask for you.
We wanted
to keep us all safe.
Eduardo, would you mind wearing that digital mask for the remainder of the episode so we can be safer?
We'll be discussing other types of digital masks today.
That everyone has to wear it to be safe, okay? Not just Eduardo.
Well, I will say that world of the absurd in some ways does fit some parts of this episode. And the opening to this episode has a speech, not a speech. It was something Emanuel Pastrich has done a group interview of other leftists who were supportive of the No Kings demonstrations, and he gave kind of his appraisal after these No Kings demonstrations, and I had sent something to you all that was written prior to the No Kings demonstrations, where Emanuel was critical of somebody there was a guy who was basically saying, look, this surveillance is all this. It's not about no kings. We're all getting surveilled, and so we don't have to worry about kings. We have to worry about this digital dystopia that's being built. And Emanuel, I do believe he believes that a digital prison is being built, but was critical of this person's kind of indifference to these demonstrations and to what he's calling the emergence of a kind of proto-fascism that's emerging under the Trump administration. Michael had asked, who is Emanuel Pastrich? He was a person who ran in 2024, opposed to both parties, trying to build an alternative that's a freedom alternative. I think his politics tend to be more progressive and kind of libertarian progressive mix. He had been outcast by the Green Party for his anti-COVID positions. And we've interviewed him on What's Left. And I think we shared a lot of agreement about the state of politics, the need for a revolutionary alternative. And so for me to see him take the kind of position that obviously it's nuanced because he's seeing that there's something in that demonstration. I took it seriously, and I was like, I want to talk about this because I don't think it's just with Emanuel and other people who maybe I had felt like more in alliance with as we deal with this two-party psyop. And it's not just Emanuel. I mean, I was talking to a person we've also interviewed, Brian Belknap, who was like disagreeing with me about the significance of the No Kings demonstrations, regardless of where some of the organizing might come from. So I kind of wanted to talk about everyone here's appraisal of the No Kings, and also quote how you might relate to it, because I was faced with. I'll say that I'm part of a group called Stop AI, and they were like, "Hey, can anybody go down and flyer at the No Kings demonstration?" There was one in Oakland, and I was like, "I don't want to go there." But later, I was like, "I should go there." They had flyers, and I was preparing to go there. But then that was the same Saturday that we were meeting Fabio. So I ended up not doing it. So I had to kind of go through my own little journey a little bit around this, and I'll just say that I'll say a little bit about the demonstrations then, and people should add anything that I missed because I'm just going to do it. So first off, No King started many months ago in relationship to basically the attacks on immigrants that were taking place, where people were being picked up at workplaces, and there was actual on the ground physical resistance to that taking place. And at the time, and there was a big deal. Like it was a big deal that ICE agents and masked ICE agents were actually would not necessarily feel safe walking into a place and just picking somebody up, that they might actually face community resistance. Within 2 weeks, something called No King started, and that whole thing, if you can look through all the players in No Kings, it was just liberal Democrat stuff, thing after thing after thing after thing. Climate change, this, vote that, labor union, this, Planned Parenthood, that. It means just the who's who of the Democratic Party apparatus organized to bring No Kings into play 2 weeks after what was a direct response to ICE raids going on in communities. Since then, it's done nothing, and now more recently, a new No Kings round. So, first of all, this isn't a start. This is round 2 of No Kings. No Kings started way back when, and now this is round 2, and I believe it's in response to the National Guard being called out into these various cities. Mostly blue state kind of, or blue state cities kind of thing, or blue cities, and also like the Pentagon. Pete Hegseth is not giving the media access to certain things. So there are things that the Trump administration is doing that is more overtly, obviously, like, no, we're not gonna do what other administrations have said they would do. I can't list all of them, but they're internal stuff that is non-democratic. I think that's what I could say. And so this is now a culminating of that response, or at least it's put forward by this No Kings players again. And it was very large. It was like they said, there's 2,700 cities across the country and around the world. They speak to up to 7 million people, walking, parading around somewhere. It's nonviolent, massive, all those things I suspect are true. Maybe 7 million, 6 million. I don't know. Maybe it's 3 million. It's large. Maybe it's 10 million. It's a large mobilization. And I guess what I would say is my first take on this whole thing is, to me, it looks like the mirror image of the Charlie Kirk Memorial. The Charlie Kirk Memorial was an attempt to run up the electoral system again, but to build the right and simultaneously build the left in response to the right. And now I think this is the attempt to build the left and simultaneously build up the right in response. so the two sides can kind of like lay out the clear alternative that they represent in the coming election. But basically, to me, it's just a giant vacuum cleaner into our electoral system again, and to get you to decide which side you're on. Are you red or are you blue? Are you lesser evil red? Or are you lesser evil blue? And I don't see any first step for us in this. And it seems very much like a move to capture people inside of a system that has always been autocratic, but is increasingly exposing itself as more and more autocratic. And that, I think, is the say maybe that's where the difficulty is like this system has always, we were born into autocracy, and but it's now it's exposing itself and revealing itself to be more and more autocratic. And what do you do when the autocrats organize opposition to autocracy? And so how we will relate to it, what does this mean? Those are the things I want to talk about today.
I'm curious about Eduardo. Why you think is you're not in the country, right? And like, what's kind of like your take from where you're at?
Well, the No Kings protest was announced. I mean, it's in the news. I see it in my social media feed. I see it in the news, in the television at my uncle's house, which I visit. So it's definitely there. We're aware of what's happening here in Latin America, especially as the attacks on Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Petro, who is recently the new the hero of Latin America for trying to defend in the news, in the mainstream news, the sovereignty of Latin American countries. And Claudia Sheinbaum, who is my president here in the USA and in Mexico, is she is seen as this constant, fresh breath of air for Mexico. That is the economic status of Mexico has also given the power to where it's at because it's attributed to AMLO and Claudia Sheinbaum, and so they see her as the leading voice and the calm voice in trying to restrain Trump and her relationship with the USA, in creating new ties with China and Brazil. So I think that the villain that is portrayed, Trump, is just the way it seems. So there's a lot of oh, look what Trump's doing over there, and they're protesting against Trump, and those No Kings protests. That's how it's seen. That's how it's portrayed. And so I'm afraid. Well, that's the mainstream news. I'm afraid that we're losing a lot of what I would like to actually see, which is the reaction of, I think, some of what you all might share as well, which is I think that there is something at large here happening, which is all of this being led by Democrat operatives at No Kings protests, and also how much influence CEOs and billionaires have. I would like to mention, but I don't know if y'all want to go there yet, because of I'm more just amazed at how much Trump listens to other billionaires. There was supposed to be a raid today in the Bay Area, apparently.
Yeah.
And people are mobilizing this week. I'm sorry, did I answer your question, Kenny, before I move on to that? Sorry. And so, is this a good time for me to share this article that I was reading? Is this okay? All right. So, so that's the portrayal of, like, okay, look over there, U.S. American citizens standing up to Trump. Of course, he's the villain, but not looking at our own governments and our ties to Israel, for example, here in Mexico. But here, let me share this article. It says, Trump calls off expected immigration show of force in San Francisco. and this image, very provocative. And then it says here, and it says here that there was a planned surge of fellow immigration agents in San Francisco after friends persuaded him to back down. Great people like Jensen Huang, who is the CEO of NVIDIA, I think that's how you say it, and Mark Benioff, which is also the chief executive of Salesforce, and others have called off, saying that the future of San Francisco is great. And the president wrote on social media, they want to give it a shot. Therefore, we will not surge San Francisco on Saturday. And there's a lot of explanation about what happened, how it turned out, and the mayor of San Francisco also calling Trump, and there was this whole thing about what was happening. I think it's telling when you have this No Kings protest that is supposed to be an opposition towards the centralization of power, towards monarchical power. And if you just do a quick Google search, anyone can do any search on the capitalist pyramid, and then you see the monarchy, right? And today's modern time, the president or the prime minister or anyone's head of state. And then under that, you have the elite capital owners. Those are the billionaire class, which in past times were any of the dynasties or people who were having influence at the time were the religious authority or the aristocrats. And then after that, you have a managerial professional class. If you think about who really is owning or controlling how the system, the economic system is being run, it's the hedge fund managers, it's the major shareholders, it's the CEOs. And this protest, right, or all of it is really not a No Kings protest. It's an anti-Trump protest, because a lot of people that were there supported Kamala Harris, supported Bernie Sanders, AOC, Nancy Pelosi, all the Democrats. That's why I think it's a Democrat protest led by operatives from the Democratic Party. And if you saw that article I read that Trump called off the raid that was supposed to be happening today, who did he call? What was the reason? Excuse me. What was the reason why he called it off? Because people like Jensen, this person, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, he is, how much does he make? I'm just looking here. I have here. His worth is $100 billion as of 2025. Who is the other person that called Trump? Of course, he's listening to these people. And the other CEO, who also makes, I don't know how much is he making? I'm just looking it up quickly. $9.7 billion. These are billionaires that are calling Trump. And all these people have some investment into AI. Well, Mark Benioff has Salesforce, which is a cloud computing, company, but they all take care of other AI companies. And their net worth, I mean, it just rises. So that's who Trump is listening to. These are the people that called Trump to call off these raids. And I think that is what we need to oppose when we're thinking about having these rallies, which is the reason why I don't even attend them anymore. Because I think about when I was an adolescent, I attended 2003 protest against Iraq. But then I was thinking, where was the anti-war protest when Obama went into Syria and he won the Nobel Peace Prize, which we discussed some time ago, Andy and I, that the Nobel Peace Prize means nothing at this point. Oh my God, I'm not going to be able to give my full comment like this. So I'm just thinking, as we look at this, just how much are these people, what was it? How many people did you say, Andy?
7 million. 7 million.
I don't want to think that everyone there doesn't have some, I mean, there's some genuine folks, I'm sure. But if we look at the real people behind Trump and the CEOs I mentioned, and Elon Musk and just the people running the show behind these protests, I'm so just what's the word? Skeptical of what any of it can accomplish, and why should we even attend this protest?
Well, I mean, I could jump in because I'm so glad you brought that up. Uh, I was gonna bring that up too. Um, and the relationship to me is that uh, who are the real kings, right? Who are the kings that people are talking about? Basically, some phone calls from local, tech giants can convince Trump. Okay, I won't send in the National Guard, right? The way that we understand no kings, I think it's the same way we should understand the way that the Democrats will try and make it seem like Newsom was going to sue Trump. Newsom was going to sue, and that's what they're focused on. They're like, wow, Newsom was standing up. He was going to file a lawsuit, and that's why Trump had to back down. As opposed to actually his billionaire buddies were like, his billionaire bosses were like, come on, we don't need this. And on the other hand, the mayor of San Francisco also had to essentially grovel and say, no, we're gonna really crack down on crime. We're doing a good job. We're cleaning up the city, right? So instead of focusing on the actual capitulation and the actual power, uh, um, no kings makes it seem like it's all about. I mean, literally, the slogan "No Kings" makes it about federal overreach. Like that's literally like the immediate reframing. Like, oh, he's somehow being like a king instead of a democratic. As if there was some inherent democratic process that we have right now that he's somehow eroding. Right. So I think the way to understand the no kings phenomenon is that there is naturally anger, and this is how they corral it. And this is the way that, I mean, even if I don't have evidence written out like, okay, we need to build this no kings protest to prevent a more radical movement from forming. Even if I don't have that on paper, I know that this is the way that the system responds to people's anger, because what is in place is essentially an intellectual leadership tied to the ruling class, meaning like no kings is not organized directly by democratic operatives, meaning like there is a tremendous grassroots, like people volunteer out of nowhere and come and build it, but they are not in control of the actual demands because there are no demands, right? There's no clear demands. There's no clear organizational structure, and the whole one of the best critiques I heard of it was from a Butch Ware post where it's like this is not organizing, this is just mobilization. And when you just mobilize people with no clear demands or no clear organized structure, then the default leadership is the ruling class leadership. So yeah, you can have your little Palestine contingent, right? But a lot of people are going to be hostile to it. And you can try and organize people at the rally, right? But the rally itself is not an actual organizational act meant to connect people together for future action. It is literally a way that the system allows people to express themselves in order to maintain a controlled opposition, right? So to me, it's not a good start. And I feel like there's a trap in always thinking like, oh, well, this is just the best we can do right now. And I think more clearly we have to see that the strength of that organization, of that organizing, the strength of the No Kings protests, to me is a way we can measure the balance of forces. This is who has ideological control over what is now the opposition. It's the Democratic Party, and it's dominated by people who are actually hostile to actually making real demands. Right? There's no clear demands anywhere associated with the No Kings protest, other than we need to obey the rule of law, which but the demands are not like end ICE raids, stop the genocide. There's no specific demands, and that is it's perfectly designed to get the result that we're getting, which is people feeling like they're doing something and no actual challenge to the system. So thank you for bringing that up, Eduardo, because I felt like, who's the real kings? It's the freaking capitalists who are actually all serving the god of finance. And, since that is not even really touched on in any organized or explicit way in these No Kings protests, they're basically, a way to corral people back to the Democratic Party, which they are well practiced at. They have a lot of practice corralling people's anger back into the Democratic Party. And this is how it's manifesting itself now.
So you've taken all my points. But no, actually, so I definitely see what you're saying, right? Like this, I do think there is something to read into here, right? Like you said, Michael, I'm just voicing what you're saying, that there is energy, right? Like the ruling class recognizes, right, that as shit gets, bad, there is energy and it needs to be herded in one way or another, right? That's the function of AOC, the Bernie Sanders. That's the function of Trump, really. That's the function of the JD Vances, right? To keep at this division, right? In corral each section that gets split off, right, of the general population that could potentially threaten power. And so, how do we get here, right? Like, how do we get this energy to move into this? It's kind of something that I've been thinking about, because as much as there are real lives getting fucked with, right? And my father was deported. I know what that feels like. Like, I saw my dad behind fucking glass, chain on the hips, chain on the wrist, chain on his feet. Even though he came here as a political refugee, from a country that was destroyed by the U.S. Right? And so I know that first fucking hand. But at the same time, I know that there is a game being played here, right? Like, I know that we are being bombarded by images, traumatizing images on purpose, right? We have to recognize why the fuck they're going for liberal cities, right? It needs to reignite this wedge, right? So this is a revival. I agree with you, Lipson. This is another revival. This is a revival that, yes, revives both, right? Like, and this is, like you said, like the other half of the Charlie Kirk revival. And again, it's giving life to both parties, right? Because it keeps feeding, this idea that on the left, right, the liberal democratic left, that Trump is the most evil person, that he's the most vulgar version, and he's the biggest threat to this system, right? And he hides the notion that it doesn't matter who the fuck you put in there, right? Like, to this day, it's still hard to argue with a lot of people that fucking Obama was a deporter in chief, like, that motherfucker was like so efficient. His administration was so efficient at getting people out of here, and no one did shit, really, right? And like, you go back to your fucking stall when, like, the Democrats come out, and they're doing shit in a more humane way, whatever the fuck that means, right? And so, yes, the No Kings demonstration. I actually saw on the Do Dissidents, the Russell went on to Harlem, and I don't know if you guys saw that, but he has a video which kind of like, he starts with like the Seinfeld music and logo, and he goes out there, interviews people, and people don't know why the fuck they're there. People are reading from a script as to which songs they're supposed to swing, and Free Palestine is not in there. It's actually deliberately left out. There's no real demands. They ask people, and they literally, and it's mostly older white people. And he says, you're in Harlem, so Harlem is 60% black people. Where are the black people? And people are like, it's a class thing. That's when they start bringing it. It's a class thing. Like they had to work, I guess, type of thing. And so, and then there is this interaction between two ladies, a white lady at the bus stop and a black lady who's not participating on the protest. And she said, "You're not going far without Jesus," the black lady. And I think there is something to that, not because I'm religious, right, but because the right recognizes that shit. That is more politically, that is more efficient than any no fucking King's March. And actually, the no King's March shows me that there is no fucking soul in whatever the left claims to to bring, to challenge. There is no soul. There's no political soul, right? And in part, okay, let me just pause there. So I just want to reiterate the point that we're being bombarded with images, right? They're deliberately doing this shit the same. I'm starting to think about the strikes on the coast of Venezuela in a similar way. It affects real people. They say they're killing real drug dealers, quote unquote, right? But the fact is that they're creating images, right? And they're creating sentiment. And I do believe what Eduardo was saying, that in general, even outside of the US, people buy this bullshit that is Trump doing this shit. That is not the US, engaging, in one hurting, the energy of people, right? In distracting us from critically questioning the entire system, right? That is collapsing, that we're arguing that is in trouble, and that is hurting us into war and all this shit. So I think that's important to have in front of us, that we are all being bombarded. Because trust me, I got back on social media, and I can see what it does to me. Even though I rationalize this shit, I see what it does to me physically, to see like people being chased, right? And with masks, fucking federal authorities, or them going into Chicago and like fucking assaulting a building and tying little kids, and all this shit that that they said is happening. But again, the point is that they're creating this on purpose, and so it brings me back to like the struggle, the actual struggle, and why there is no soul on the left, right? Why there is no political, because there is no real engagement, there is no real struggle, right? Like I've been reading Beyond Vietnam, Time to Break a Silence by MLK. And, I've been very cynical, getting into that reading and just diving into that to start. And yet I'm starting to see, and I'm not saying like that, that movement wasn't captured, but what we have now is not even fucking close to what was going on back then. Right? Because Dr. King engaged in a revolutionary process, in the sense, this is how I see it. They were doing shit. They went to jail, right? And let's not romanticize jail, but they were doing shit. Yeah, you can, discredit some of these things as reformists, but that's a revolutionary process. When you engage and you do and you evolve. In that speech, it's what shows how Martin Luther King was evolving, because he then started doing the dangerous shit, challenging the United States of America, in public, and saying to people, don't go to war. Young people, don't go to war. And also expressing, the connections between, the poor over there and the poor over here. But all the left can offer, right, and this I know from my own organizing, is let's go save some fucking people. Right? Let's go save the broken. And we don't recognize that we are politically and spiritually and all the fucking shit broken. All of us. If you're not fighting for yourself, all you can offer is a fucking handout. Right? And this is what I see here, that the result of, just some Disney-fied shit, just go save someone else, right? That you're not realizing that you're fighting for your own shit too, that our destinies are all connected. Right? And because there is no actual engagement, right? In a way where we learn and evolve and keep asking questions that will take us, I believe, to bigger questions, right? And so, and it's frustrating, right? Because here we have and again, this is just the video that do dissonance, right? It's by no means a representation of all the types of demonstrations that were out there, but it shows that there a couple generations have been lost, and maybe this is where what you brought up at our meeting, Michael, comes up. Maybe the young people, like maybe they will have a different perspective, because the people that are telling them what to do, they've been fucking lost. They've gotten too much schooling and not enough education. And so that's what I had to say about this.
Well, I guess the thing, that's an interesting way of putting it, as no soul, because that question of soul came up in our Charlie Kirk memorial discussion. And Eduardo was very upset about, look how Christianity is being used. Look how religion and the Christian church is once again being used to herd people into a really dark place. And he was absolutely right. Absolutely right. Frustrated that I kept on going back to how the Democrats are doing it too, but absolutely right about that. And we are seeing the mirror image, the secular mirror image here, of the soullessness of the progressive cause when it starts on its mobilization drive, as opposed to from the bottom organizing. That you can direct an army using God, or you can direct an army using progressive slogans of no kings that are completely, the emptiness cannot be overstated, that a Democratic Party that appointed its last presidential candidate, that hid that its last presidential candidate was, that the actual president that was there was like completely mind gone, and hid that fact, and then even go before then, and that basically made up primaries for themselves to do whatever, that you are going to entrust those people with fighting against autocracy, when they have and when they were forcing shots into people, including even my friend Brian, who, like, he was forced to take 2 shots, like, under the Democrats. It's like forced medical procedures. And if you think that these characters are going to, like, they're not in opposition to one another, they are united in their love of autocracy. And I think Eduardo, the example you gave in San Francisco is very good. And I'm not entirely convinced that those 2 Silicon Valley corporate whatever are not completely in league with the Republican Party, like that. There's not just a game being played of like, oh, please don't, because this allows the mobilization that took place in San Francisco to say there are elites who are listening to us. There, even our own mayor is willing to kind of give some sort of, when really, like you said, all that mayor is saying is, please don't come in now. I'll do a crackdown that might be nicer. And we've already seen that with Obama and what was the elite 1%, the move of what was that called? That 1% thing that Obama cracked down on?
The 99%.
Occupy movement.
Occupy.
Yeah, Occupy. When he wants, like, and it's like, what is that? What is that other than autocracy? I think the one thing that can be lost in this, and to say, like, and I'm convinced that there's nothing, there is no first, that's not a first step. It's an empty step. It's a step off a cliff, if anything, again. And it's a road to nowhere. But it is true that the wheels of autocracy are being turned. And this gets us back to the discussion we were having with people like Fabio Vigi, when we say there is a system in play here that is running deeper and deeper into crisis. And they know that there are things that shows of force will have to be turned into implementation of force at home, in relationship to opposition that they may face. And immigrants are seeing the front end of the stick, both directly but also in show. Because like some of these things, they're not doing all the things that they say they're doing, and they're just making sure to put cameras on the stuff that they're showing, just to get us used to the idea that this is what happens in this country. And so there is reason to be concerned, like no question. But in this case, I am. What's so distressing is to watch that concern. Like, we have no independent ability as an independent organization to vie for that liberal architecture that produced no kings. And that's where when Michael, you talk about the balance of forces, it is 1,000 to 0. I mean, there's nothing. Like, and all we can say really is, well, I could show up at the demonstration and pass out some things to say maybe this and that, but that even that method has shown, I don't think that works that much. So it's distressing. That's what I would say. It's distressing. Of course I'm distressed about capitalist autocracy, but that's what it is. I'm distressed. The opposition, the alternative to capitalist autocracy is working class revolution. It is distressing to see how that continues to be destroyed and the air just be let out of the tire and the car being driven off the cliff instead of being driven towards something that might lead us somewhere. I will have one thing I want to question to you guys, because there's an analogy that I want to pose to you that I want to see how you guys would respond, but I'll just leave it at that for now.
I have a question before. Did you say, can you just expand a little bit more on your Charlie Kirk comparison?
You mean the religion one?
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you said, Andy, and I know, Andy, you're playing footsie with these Christians, but look how Christianity is being used. Look how it's being used in Charlie Kirk. Does that not concern you? Doesn't that show you there's nothing there? And it shows me that these institutions will use things like faith and belief and use it to the darkest ends. And in the same way, dark forces will use concerns about autocracy, people who believe in democracy, who might even believe in fairness, who might even believe that people should not be deported. Though those same people on the other side will use those so-called good values, and they will use it for nothing but destruction, because that's where No Kings leads. No Kings does not lead to a dead end. It leads us back to the autocrats who are doing everything here. So I'm just saying that as horrified as you were by the Christianity being put on the march, I am equally horrified by democratic liberalism being put on the march, with this empty sloganeering of No Kings, and they're equally dangerous. And I'll also say that there are people underneath who who are Christians or are progressives or revolutionaries who have nothing to do with that shit, and we're like, fuck that, because I know they exist on both sides, and I think those people are right, and that we don't have any place to go.
Well, before you make your round questioning to all of us, because that's what you said you wanted to do, pose a question. I just slight comment on just two things. One thing that Kenny said, and then we're not going to enter this discussion because this is not the episode for it, but I will still hold and state for the record that I just think that thousands of years of the backbone of culture, laws, and morals, of religion, cultism, is non-comparison to the most recent, just emerging century, emerging in the last century, this academic political ideology. I can be equally horrified, but I don't know if they're equally as dangerous, because I just think you have one that's been polished for thousands of years, and my experience, having traveled through almost 30 countries, it's not the academic institutions and Democratic Party that has the most influence in all those countries that I've been to, but rather the religious institutions, whether it's Muslim, Christian, and or any other religion that's one of the major forces of the world. So I don't know if it's equally as dangerous. But to Kenny's point, what I am afraid of, and to tie it to what I think we're equally horrified to, is the idea that our savior could be the Democratic Party, because I'm just as upset by those videos that you see, Kenny, on social media with ICE hurting, persecuting people that look like me and of my people. And I also have people that I know that have been rounded up. I'm also angry. I get angry because people who share these videos, I look and you see it on social media, and then I go right to their profiles, and these people tend to be maybe some liberal lefty or some woke person, and then I look at their support at the very bottom or wherever, their screenshots of their support for the Democratic Party, and I'm thinking to myself, where were they during the Obama years? And that makes me angry as well, because I know people personally that have been deported. Andy, you and I know someone personally that was deported during that time. And so when I was once at prior to the confinement time, at a party, and I was among some university professors, and there was someone from KPFA there as well, and they were talking about this was after Trump was elected, the yearning or the love or the missing of Obama, and even I looked up one of their Facebook profiles, and even the image of the Obama family right there, as if it was the most ideal family of the American vision for America, the USA. And I just thought, this is an English university professor that is crying for Obama to come back. And I was thinking at that time, fuck, you don't have anyone in your family that has been affected or that during that time. And so I get more angry by these images being shared by people who are sharing them, because the villain is Trump, and that's not the villain. They forget the whole fucking apparatus of controlling how people flow in and out of a border is actually, that's the real thing, that's the evil that we have, and flowing, the invisible evil that we have that's flowing through our country. And so I get really upset by those images more than the people's profile images that I see. Some of them I don't even know, but they're organizers. Where were they? Where were they? And I remember walking to work once, and when I heard the news of Syria being invaded by the USA, I was also, where's the movement against that? I forget what year, but those were the Obama years that people.
They were following the direction laid out by the Democrats.
Well, that's what so that's what makes me angry. And so I recognize that the ideology that the Democrats have that's influencing all of this movement, that I want people to wake up to it and say, you know what, fuck that. We're not going to allow us to be fooled again. Anyhow, those are my two slight comments.
I want to share an anecdote which is related to that, if that's okay. In my radical political circle at my college, we had a discussion about No Kings protest. Two different students went as part of, one of them's in an anti-war group, and then another one is in PSL, and they related to the No Kings by trying to engage people about politics, which I don't think is a wrong thing to do, as long as you're trying to actually, how much effect it has, remains to be seen. But one of the fascinating stories that I heard was uh, one of the people was engaging people in conversation and saw someone wearing like a penis suit, right? So if you notice the way that they strike back at Trump, it's like body shaming, like the stuff about like his neck, oh, he has a small penis, like, all this stuff is supposed to be like that is to them, that is to like the older, whiter boomers, like that is what political opposition is, and strongly worded letters, maybe a threat of a lawsuit, and talking with this person who was wearing a penis suit, she was, I don't remember exactly what the rationale for the penis suit was, but as soon as the person noticed that he was wearing a keffiyeh, the person in the penis suit was like, "We're done," and then left, and then like wouldn't talk to him anymore, right? And to me, that's such a great encapsulation. and everybody said essentially that was the kind of thing that was dominant, right? It was the older white, and I will say, they're whiter, but I think that there's a demographic that was essentially somewhat well served under the neoliberal regime, and they see themselves as not in the Republican team, and that essentially forms the ideological leadership of any kind of vague mass movement. Those people will move into the leadership position and will be hostile to any real confrontation, any real demands. And we have to have, like, people have to like literally build a different thing, right? Like if I was in a group that had more numbers, it would be, we're going to have a counter protest or stage, walkout to split the thing away from the liberals, but that is the kind of thing that has to come from people who are, more broadly connected, right? And I wanted to say also that I really appreciate, and I'm trying to, I think there's a connection between this idea of not having a soul and the way that Kenny framed it as like, if you're not fighting for yourself, all you can offer is a handout. And there's a connection between people really genuinely feeling like it is in their own interest to change something together, and this idea of like, oh, well, we have to do it sort of on behalf of these other people. Like that is to me, when I think about, and when Kenny brought up the civil rights movement, like the transition Martin Luther King made was like they were actually genuinely confronting the state power, the power structure in the South, right? The segregationist, explicitly white supremacist regime that was in the South was literally being confronted. They were actually confronting power. There was a real demand on power. And at that earliest phase, they had essentially the backing of Northern capitalists. They had the backing of people who didn't want to be embarrassed internationally any longer by the segregationists, right? And there's a bunch of different reasons why they're like, yeah, this segregation stuff has to go. We're an international world power competing with the communists. And once they actually then they were able to defeat the power structure in the South, then naturally that led to raising broader questions about the system, which is exactly when he became dangerous, right? So that is a revolutionary process, but I think one of the things we can see came out of it was that the liberal establishment that grew out of it, which is connected to the development of the welfare state after that, is now part of this mechanism of control that prevents the kind of economic demands that Martin Luther King started to raise at the end of his life from having any kind of independent force, from actually putting a demand on the system. And so this is part of the intellectual, the ideological framework that we're trapped inside, is something that has actually grown out of neutralizing anger. It has evolved in order to contain and neutralize people's anger. And sure, maybe it's good people are going out and doing things, but like we should not, like we have to also judge, like, are people actually disobeying? Is there like some defiance happening? Is there some demand? Do people have some kind of goal? Was there any kind of, or were new layers of people engaged in actually learning how to change things? Or did they just kind of show up and, feel like they were doing something? There's a mixture, but the dominant one was definitely people were just showing up to feel like they were doing something. They were part of the Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and the sort of news comedy resistance. They really socked it to Trump. They insulted him, and there's strongly worded signs. That's very different than confronting the actual power structure of the state and people learning in a group how to do that.
Just to kind of get back to that again, the thing that has impacted me is that journey of consciousness. This is what Dr. King talked about, right? And sure, it ended in what you're saying, and we have to study these things. This is what we study history, right? And what I'm more focused on right now, personally, is on that journey within each of us. Like, in how far will you follow your consciousness? How far, would you? How many questions? How many steps ahead would you go? Right? Like, that's the journey I've taken in what's left. Like, in again, I'm not a person with degrees, and I'm here talking to fucking PhDs and whatever the fuck people with, like, you know what I mean? And like, but that's where my journey has taken me, to be comfortable standing with people who have a lot of knowledge and have my own, discretion, have my own, things that are important, and speak about them, right? And I feel like more people are gonna have to take that, right? And obviously, there's questions about even the ability to learn, right, in terms of like the time and all that shit. But I think, again, if you're truly to engage in some democratic and real democracy, right, we're gonna have to listen to a lot of people that we don't agree with. And I think that's more than even like the theoretical, like, what's next for me. That's where I'm right now. Is that my relation to anger, my relation to, how I feel to when I hear someone else, because trust me, I still struggle to hear some more right wing, like, arguments, and I know that affects me, and I have to push through that to kind of gain some understanding, in that process. I feel like I've realized, what, these people are also afraid, right? Like, this is and if I don't have some sort of understanding, right? Like, even if I have disagreements, then all we can offer is this. Honestly, I'll call it childish shit. That you can just talk some superficial shit about someone else. Not even disagree on a, like an ideological or philosophical level. We can't even do that, right? And again, all we can offer is some fucking symbolic shit. Look, I wrote a fucking sign. Like, that's why I don't partake in a lot of these protests, right? Like, I've done some of it in the past, and I felt that way, that is just some symbolic shit. But and now in the process of organizing, when I know the difficulties of engaging and even just having basic discussions, right? Or actually, like, bringing political substance to an organizing, that's where you learn your lessons, and you start asking a different set of questions. So I guess that the point that I'm trying to make out of all this is like, yes, this is important what we're doing, but not as important as fucking doing something, in having what we're thinking about, what we're be put into practice, right? Because again, what I see is like, I donated, I donated to this cause, I donated to that other fucking cause. and even like just showing up to block ice, there is lessons to be learned there. There's there is lessons, right? But again, like if you're not making those connections of how your life and everyone's life really is getting fucked with and where we're heading, I don't think we have a fucking chance.
Yeah. So I have a question, so I'll ask it and then you guys decide whether we want to take it up now or want to do another episode. So this was and if you decide not to, then we're just going to kick off where Kenny left off, and then maybe just take it from there. So when I was talking to Brandy about this no king stuff, and my own thoughts about it, and then also talking with Brian and we were on different sides of this question. Like he acknowledged that the organizing might be by the Democrats, but this thing is they're on top of something they can't control. And I was like, no, that's not. But anyway, and that something's being unleashed that can get out of the control of the capitalists. So I think we're all in agreement that these No King demonstrations are top-down led road to nowhere. But then I was wondering to myself, well, how is that different than colored revolutions? And I feel like we've kind of implied that colored revolutions, while led by the capitalists and often led by US imperialists, that there was something being ignored by the people who are just saying, oh, those are just colored revolutions. So I am curious, because everything we would say about this No Kings demonstration, that it's rooted in a real, actual class struggle moment, that I would go back into LA. That's where the real class struggle moment was. That it itself is not an expression of class struggle, that it's an expression of a class, of the capitalist class, redirecting the working class into its interests as opposed to the independent interests of the working class. All of those things that are in play with the claim, well, what people, the standard critique of these colored revolutions, which is that these things are being led by very pernicious forces that have in no way in any interest in the actual complaint and grief that is being unearthed and that is coming up, and that is in fact it is a redirection into something possibly even worse, if not just as bad. So, would our critique of colored revolutions be literally a mirror image of what we're saying about No Kings? So maybe I want to. Do people want to take that on right now, or?
I got something to say right back at you.
Okay. So then I'll leave it at that. I want to hear what people have to say about that then.
I think there are some differences between a color revolution and what we're seeing internally. But I do think it's exactly the same dynamic. There would not have to be any No Kings protests if people weren't actually upset, right? Meaning like, yeah, I think if we were completely captured, and there was and they were completely in control, and they could control people's emotions completely, then there would be no protests at all. There would be no fight back against ICE. There would be, right? So the desire, right, the people turning out to these things is an expression that there is a complaint, right? But the question of whether or not it could be something that gets out of control, in the abstract, sure, you could say this kind of protesting behavior is, it's sort of like a form that could have radical content. It is like a behavior that could possibly have, lead to escalation, right? But I think what I've come to understand more deeply is that you can the best predictor of whether that is going to be true or not is actual organization that is calling for that radical content, right? So if that doesn't exist, then it's basically not going to, it's basically going to be controlled by the most organized layer, which is, the capitalists. And in other countries, there is a real destabilization. There's a destabilization that occurs in a color revolution. So there's an oppositional state that's being taken down. Here internally, it's just a completely fake opposition that is not even turning over. I mean, there's no change in power happening here. Like in Ukraine, they had to have a color revolution to get rid of any sense of real Ukrainian, nationalism even, and just sell the whole thing over to the neoliberal NATO. There was actually, the destabilization led to a real shift of power. And that is not what we are seeing here. I would say I go back to like the 18th Brumaire, and there is class struggle, and the natural leadership of that class struggle is the class that's in power. And people are angry. What are they going to do? They're going to do whatever's available for them to do. And so by providing the no kings, it's essentially a perfect co-optation. And I don't see where the radical content is going to come in and break a layer off, right? And that's a thing. Like, we hope that happens, but I have no evidence of that, and therefore I would not predict that that's going to happen.
Yeah, no, I agree with Michael in that it's a form of directing, energy, right? Social energy for an outcome. I do think there is a difference, and maybe it might be just by the nature that we're in the fucking epicenter of the, of the power that's doing the color revolution somewhere else, right? And like, there's no bodies on the street, and I do have questions, right? Like, and I think that's our task. Anybody who calls themselves revolutionary or whatever the fuck, that we will have to question where that direction is going, because it can always be captured, right? Even if it has radical demands, it can always be captured, right? That's the question, the same questions that people in where like quote unquote color revolutions happen should be asking, right? Themselves, like is this really like independent? Like, and what, like maybe have a sense of what our demands are, right? Like and is that like a challenge to the power structure that will remain independent, right? So I think there are similarities and differences, like Michael said, but we have the same set of questions, I think, always. Yeah. And I just wanted to add, I guess, to what we're saying, that I also believe that there is zero fucking chance that this gets out of hand. If anything, it shows me that, like, and it's kind of a test, right? Of we've talked about elections, right? And how that is kind of a metric of how subdued the population is, right? The more people vote is the more belief that they have, even if it's reluctant belief, that something will come about through those channels, right? And it shows still some level of commitment to, again, the orthodox channels of power and submission to those powers, right, that already exist. And so that's why, again, and this is what I think Kings is about, right? And also the revival shit, the Charlie Kirk, that is ultimately trying to bring back a lot of people who have been discontent, right? Like with this traditional system, because there is, I do believe there has been people who have been, like kind of wandering off, right? But it's not new. Like that was the task of fucking Bernie Sanders, right? Like, in this is the task of Donald Trump too, right? To herd people back into again the same political dynamic that leads you to a political cliff, right? With no real change and just doing the same crazy shit.
In previous conversations, we talked about how essentially the Brian Berletic position is that the revolutions in Nepal and across Asia were essentially completely staged and controlled by the United States. And my only critique of that now is that the reason why we can say that is because there's ideological infrastructure that has been built by the United States and not an alternative infrastructure built from within those countries. So it's like, basically, do we look at a No Kings protest and be like, it's just completely controlled by the Democrats and there's no real content to it? Or do we look at it and say, well, like, people are trying, and that's sort of like the good start. I mean, people went out and did something, and that could maybe be good, a good practice for something more effective. So, like, I guess, do you think this is like a good start? Like, or do you like the revolutions in Nepal might seem like a good start, or are they, things we see as completely just a U.S. constructed op?
Well, to
Is
say
that mischaracterizing your question, Andy?
no, it isn't, and I'm just saying I would say that this No Kings is not a good start. It is a awful misdirection of actual class anger and potential, something that could potentially, if there was independent organization, like I very much agree with you, which there's none, could go in a direction, and it is, and that stuff is not, it's a part of a class divided society. It's a part of a system which runs off of oppositional classes, and one an exploiting class, capitalist, and the one exploited, working class. So that anger and opposition is built into our system. The possibility of it being redirected is a subjective factor based on the organization, and apparently there's none in the United States. And so, no, it's not a good start. It is a horrible misdirection of class anger back into the control of the class that is the author of all the misdeeds, the capitalists. And I would say the same thing now with the color revolutions, that those are not good starts. They are awful misdirections of actual anger that could have led, and takes the form of a kabuki revolution, of a kabuki turning over of change, but providing none, and one that's completely controlled by the very people who run that system. So nothing's really changing within it. The only difference I guess I have with Brian Berletic is that there is an energy at the bottom which has the potential to create revolutionary change. He would say no, the revolutionary change is going to have to be found by another set of elites, Russia, multipolar world, BRICS, and he thinks that the possibility of fundamentally changing society doesn't exist, and so he looks over there. So I think in saying these color revolutions are fraudulent, he gets more right than wrong. The piece that I do think is important, that I believe he misses, is that there is a potential out that the capitalists are responding to and attempting to direct against each other, and that's going to be true. And if there's a revolution in the United States, China and Russia is going to use it. They're going to use it. They're going to pay for. They are going to pay people within those revolutionary movements to destabilize their own government, and that's just the reality. Like the Russian Revolution is proof of that. How Germany came in to tried to help bring down the Russian part, the Russian provisional government, not knowing that the forces they were unleashing would lead to their own government coming down. But they don't give a fuck at that point. They're figuring, I'm using something against my enemy that I'm at war with. So if we have an actual revolution, an independent revolutionary movement, that movement will not just have to deal with internal co-optation. It'll have to deal with how it responds to co-optation from so-called other capitalist forces outside the United States that are considered enemies. And if we fraternize with them, that's going to be used for crackdowns internally. So that's the nature of the beast. The working class is going to have to contend with an array of capitalist forces that are going to come in and try to utilize it for its own means. And our ability to navigate that on its own independent basis it will tell you the ability of that revolution to move forward.
I wanted to address this idea that there is no organization, because I think, in in approximation, right? Like comparatively, yes, there is no organization. However, there are people who are in smaller constellations that, as they build, will become more contested. So it's not true that there's no radical content being organized. I just, like, I have seen, elements of the left growing, and I have critiques of them, but I'm also like mostly glad that there are places for people to go to talk about the concept of working class revolution. And I think there's problems there. It's possible they just get churned out. There's my whole critique, but it's not true that no one is organizing around specific demands. That there are people who are trying, and as they become successful, that is going to become an even more contested territory, right? So yes, comparatively, right? So when I say like seeing it as a balance of forces, yeah, the Democrats are the only ones able to right now mobilize several million people across the country. There's no left organization, or not even like a coalition around a demand that can do that. However, it doesn't mean that there's zero. It means comparatively, yes, it's approximately nothing, but it's not nothing.
I agree.
And that, to me, also, like the success and visibility of those things will be something that the Democrats will try very hard to suppress. Meaning, like, this is another thing, like, just because I don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening at all, right? There's a certain amount of like humility I feel like we have to have. Like, we don't actually know how many people tried to block the freeway or tried to shut down like the resistance that's happening is you have to have kind of direct connection to it, or it has to happen to go viral in order for you to know about it, right? Because they would like us to think that no one is actually disobeying anything, right? Like, to me, one of the most heartening things was seeing people throwing bricks at ICE. It's like, yes, we need that, and we need that to become even more organized. And we need that, like, that's the spirit, and the spirit is there, right? And I like that you started with that, because it's almost like the No Kings could be seen directly as a direct response to the fact that people were actually resisting the ICE raids. And it prevents some kind of other organization around a different set of politics from growing. In fact, it probably had a negative impact on those local organizations that were leading some of that in LA. So yeah, people are resisting, but they're scattered and isolated, and that's what the ruling class wants to maintain. And they're doing a good job so far. This is my conclusion is the ruling class is we're still in a completely one-sided class war.
I just want to add that, at least for me, a true measure of progress will be when we actually engage in political action while questioning even this dynamic of right and left, right? Because as we've also criticized it, but we still use it at the same time, right? Like, and so, because like at least in the what I'm engaging into my like reading and shit is like, this is the reason I look at Fred Hampton, right? Even and even Martin Luther King, even Malcolm X at the end of his life. Why the fuck they became real dangerous? Why the fuck they got a bullet to the head? Like, why they had to go, right? That is true, like a challenge to power. That is what power is scared of, when like these lines blurred, right? Like of like right left, and it becomes like a ruling against the ruling class, against a class struggle. Because I still think that we ourselves like are again engaging in this dynamic of right and left, right, and we kind of go back and forth, but that to me is a true like measure of when something that has the potential to really grow. Because again, you can be a leftist and they're showing you they're gonna use the fucking anti, you know, what is it? That act that they're using against like subversives.
Yeah, the anti-Antifa thing.
Yeah, like essentially that. Like that's all you're gonna be squashed easily. Like like. But now when you have mass support, right, like that crosses that line that we're supposed to respect, then we're fucked, or we can do it, gonna be squashed like fucking roaches. And so, again, for me personally, that's the journey I'm on right now. My task is to kind of like really work on that shit. Like personally, like what do I have to do to be able to live crossing that line and like even like at some point erase it?
I don't know if we have a lot of time to explore this topic, Andy. And so I'm a little bit annoyed that you brought it up, because you should have brought it up at another
No,
episode.
it's done. Like I'm good with it.
Those are expressions. Every time I edit, I look at Kenny and Michael's expressions now, because I don't realize what is happening. I look at Andy and then suddenly I'm editing and I'm thinking, what is so funny with you both? Stop doing those expressions. You're distracting me, Michael. Well, I just think we're way too far. We're doing other things, and I'm annoyed with Andy. You should have saved this for another episode. Kenny has been around us. He knows how this is between Andy and I. I'm so fucking annoyed by this question.
I'm sorry.
So anyhow, if I'm going to contribute, that's why I said I don't know, because it's like this is another episode for me. But here's my little. Here I have been involved. I was living in Colombia, and I have had so many friends there from Venezuela, and I have helped Venezuelans through their migrating journeys up north and listening to their stories. Last year, there was an election period where it was said that there was an election fraud because Maria Machado, who was supposed to be winning. Now, many people would say that this would not classify as a colored revolution. I would say yes, because if we look at what color revolutions are, they're large-scale demonstrations, strikes, nonviolent civil resistance rather than armed conflict, and there's usually call for fair and free elections, as well as, different student groups, NGOs, and social movements often play a central role. That's all that happened last year in Venezuela. And Maria, this Maria, little Maria, this Maria Corina Machado, who was given the Nobel Peace Prize, for fucking goodness, why would they? Who was nominated by Marco Rubio, who is from Cuban ancestry and who has always wanted to topple down these regimes in Latin America, nominated Maria Corina Machado, who is a supporter of Trump, and not because I hate Trump, but because Trump is trying to do what all previous presidents have always tried to do, which is overthrow governments in order to install governments that are working for U.S. American and the empire, and keeping Latin America as its schoolyard.
Mm-hmm.
I genuinely see real resistance in Venezuela, and no one, not even my partner who is Venezuelan, has been paid by these NGOs. So obviously there is resistance. I know people who have been incarcerated in Venezuela, whose parents have been incarcerated. I know folks that are afraid to speak up because of social media crackdown, because even WhatsApp was being threatened to be used against, and WhatsApp was supposed to be encrypted, so to speak. What happened there? So yes, there is genuine resistance, and unfortunately, and comparison with what's happening, which I want to do in a separate episode with what's happening in No Kings protests, I also want to acknowledge that there are people on the ground at the No Kings protests. 7 million people could not just be bought and paid for at these protests. So in the same manner, I don't think all these people who have rose up, people who have shared their heartfelt stories with me. And last year was heartbreaking for me because I saw people really wanting change in Venezuela, but pouring their energy onto the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, who is a Zionist, who supports the genocide in Palestine, and being the central figure in these protests. For me, it's like seeing how people are being corralled, using that energy to support a central figure, like that is their only option. It makes me so angry because I wish people were not bought, not like paid, but ideologically bought and tricked to thinking that this is the alternative. Because of so many people's civil disobedience in Venezuela and people that I know personally. And even though I'm not Venezuelan, Kenny understands. I am Latin American, and these are my people. And I have seen this in Central America, in history, and in Mexico, and in all of Latin America. Just the hope that is being thrown and being tricked by real mobilized people giving their heart and soul and being tortured, like people that I have known in Nicaragua personally, students that have also been tortured and jailed. And I think about everyone, so it makes me upset sometimes that we think that here in the West that all these people are being bought and financially paid, because it's not like that. So yes, maybe they would be revolutions that we could just dismiss and say, oh, they're just, no, but there are people on the ground that are fighting. And I'm so angry that people come in and see movement and they want to just put a net over them and then use them.
May I jump in, Eduardo?
Yeah.
You know, I appreciate what you just brought up, because it definitely brings up the same shit that happened in Nicaragua, right? Where like the left immediately like, oh, this is a right wing thing. No, motherfuckers, you don't understand what's going on the ground, right? Like I lived there. Like I know that there is discontent and like, you know, the US was involved, whatever. The point is that it's real lives, you know. And personally, like I want to share that this is also why I'm engaging with this idea of a free peace, non-violence, right? Because we romanticize that shit so much, you know. And what does that mean to its full extent, right? Like I know that, you know, someday, you know, if I had been in those situations, I might be dead, you know, one way or the other. But that's the point I'm trying to make. That I think we throw revolution a lot, you know, and I understand why people hesitate and are kind of like repelled, right? When we're just talking about destruction. And so I'm focused, like I'm changing the focus on construction, right? And it's not just a semantical thing, right? It's a different fucking approach, right? And this is why I'm talking about this blurring the lines, you know, because we are pieces in a fucking violent game. We all are, you know. And to me, like, this is why I'm so focused on this thing of compassion, because I know the people who are so quote unquote right, they're also afraid. A lot of people are afraid. They're trying to defend something. And again, we're all being pinned against each other. So, you know, when we talk about revolution and the dictatorship of the proletariat, I don't want a fucking dictatorship. I don't. And I'm sorry, I don't. What are we going to do with another minority? And I don't fucking know the answer. I just know that I'm really interrogating this shit. This is what I see in you, Eduardo, that you're interrogating this shit, and even in your hesitation of us talking about revolution before. And I'm a revolutionary because I talk about power. Like the violence might be dictated by the dynamics and all that shit. But we have to have at the forefront the compassion and humanity. But that's my struggle right now. And I'm also gonna get sentimental because if we don't have that, right, in anything that we're doing, what the fuck are we fighting? How are we any different? Right? I'm fighting for everyone. Like that's my fight. I want us to live in peace. And yes, I understand all these dynamics, but it's easy to just talk about destruction. And I don't blame people for being repelled by that shit.
Anyhow, I think this is, I mean, your question is important, Andy, and I don't want to undermine that the importance and the significance as it relates to this. And I think we should cover it in a separate episode.
Well, I want to say that I think you hit right on the actual critique that
Yep.
I was trying to articulate about. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, you literally made it very concrete, and
Yep.
and in my experience, I'm also like I work directly with people who are busting their, who are putting a lot of work into organizing things like the No Kings protest. Like I know some of these people, they are genuinely radicalized and they don't see anywhere else to go. They don't see, they don't have, there's no alternative that is politically independent saying, put your energy here. It just, it barely exists, right? So you're absolutely right. And that's sort of, I guess, the hopeful part is that there is an impulse from our class to take action to help things. But the whole problem, I think, that we're fixated, or that I'm fixated on, having been burned by a left organization, is like they will take all your fucking effort and use it for their own gains. But that's also like, that's actually why class analysis really is so useful. It's like Maria Machado happens to be an opposition leader who has class power. And so if you're in opposition, what are your choices? If you, where are their resources to put your energy to oppose things? But I think, like the compassion part, to me, I always come back to like capitalism and like critiquing capitalism and demanding something that's really truly different from capitalism, like to me comes from a deep level of compassion. Like we really just need to fucking take care of people, and then we can talk about hopes and dreams and what we want to create, that. So like, anyway, you said it better than I could say it, but I just, I think you illustrated exactly the critique between my position and Brian Berletic, which is that we don't write off the people. It's that the class itself doesn't have a tool that we know of, that we can see. And it's hard to know what to do.
I agree with Michael that you might have been frustrated with the question, Eduardo, but you gave the best answer. So that's on you. I'll say this, that so I do. So for me, in my opinion, this all ends either in revolution or nuclear destruction. Okay, that's my belief, my opinion. And the question, if it ends in nuclear destruction, the question will be, what about all those people who died, who were killed for resisting this system, or who were tortured for resisting this system? Does that mean they did it all for nothing? And the answer is yes. Because the reason they did it is to save humanity from where it's going from due to capitalism. And they and we all failed if it ends in where it's taking us. And so I don't know why I'm not able. You are able to find that emotional space of anger and bitterness and sadness in your answer. I don't know why currently I can't, although I guess I want to show you guys well, at the end of the episode, I'll show you something, but that does get me closer to that. But I think my anger finds itself in giving an answer like that, which is all of this will have been for nothing. Everything, every sacrifice people made, in my opinion, will have been for nothing if we don't do something to avert where I think this system is taking us. Because they did it, whether they knew it or not, they did it to go somewhere else, and we didn't get there. Their actions didn't get us there. Their sacrifice didn't get us there. Our inaction obviously is not going to get us there. So that's how I feel about it.
I just want to say, Lipson, that I'm not sure I agree, but we can take this up.
I was
gonna say that
stopped
too.
nodding when you said the rest, Andy, but I just don't want to continue. We should at some point finish this episode.
I like where that discussion would go. Let's do that.
So I guess we'll leave this lingering conversation for another episode.
Yeah.
Let's conclude this episode, this one here. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where we found this episode, or on our blog at whatsthatpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes, Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. And you can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog and Andy will get back to you. I'm Eduardo Barca with Kenny Cepeda, Andy Lipson, and Michael Hoffman. Thank you all very much for joining this discussion, and thank you for all the emotions that we go through in these episodes.
Yeah.
And Andy, always thought-provoking. So we'll have you all next time, and check us out. Thank you all for listening. Ciao, ciao.